Tonight on NewsWatch, investigating the IRS, why the agency might get away with targeting Tea Party groups. Plus, a key vote on the Egyptian constitution, violence in the country as people head to the polls. And CBN News sits down with a former White House chef to learn what it's like to feed the first family. All this and more tonight on NewsWatch. The FBI is not planning to file any criminal charges over the IRS Tea Party scandal. Good evening, I'm Mark Martin. The IRS targeted many of President Obama's political opponents in the run-up to the 2012 election. And while the FBI says there are no signs of criminal activity, conservative groups say there are signs of a clear political agenda. George Thomas has tonight's top story.
FBI officials say they found no evidence of political bias or enemy hunting at the IRS. The Wall Street Journal reports that so far the FBI has only found signs of mismanagement. For the conservative groups whose tax-exempt status was blocked by the IRS, that's hard to believe. When the scandal first broke, the White House insisted the issue was confined to a single agency field office in Ohio. But that turned out not to be true.
We're following the facts. They undeniably now lead to Washington.
Republicans have questioned whether the Obama administration can honestly investigate itself in the matter. And just last week, it was revealed the leader of the investigation is a political supporter of President Obama. She even donated more than $6,000 to his election campaigns. Conservatives called that situation inappropriate. But the Justice Department says it's against policy to factor in political affiliation in personnel decisions. And though the investigation may not result in criminal charges, the probe isn't over, and many are hoping the inquiry leads to change.
We need real reforms, and they must be implemented so the American people can have a restored faith that they have a government that works for them, not against them.
George Thomas, CBN News.
The American Center for Law and Justice calls this new development a sham. And here with more is ACLJ Executive Director Jordan Sekulow. Jordan, the government has concluded that there was no criminal targeting of conservative groups and chalked it up to bureaucratic mismanagement. Do you buy that?
No, I mean, it seems like a sham investigation. One is, let's think about how this whole IRS targeting scandal started with Lois Lerner. And then when she was called to testify, she was the person who admitted the IRS had wrongfully targeted conservatives. I mean, that was her own words. She refused. She took the fifth. And that means that's because she did her right to not self-incriminate based on her own testimony. So that all started out this process of, okay, who else was involved, who's willing to talk, who's not willing to talk. And we know, as of now, that the IRS, through the investigation through the Department of Justice and the FBI, just began to even try to reach out to us right before the new year, so right before Christmas, and had still not, and to this date is still not, interviewed any of our clients. How could you come to a conclusion that no crime has been committed, absolutely, and that there's no wrongdoing, no political targeting, if you will, if you haven't even talked to the potential victims?
The ACLJ represents 41 organizations in the federal lawsuit challenging the IRS. Where do things stand with that?
This is very interesting because in light of what's happened just in the last week, first we had the FBI and Department of Justice try to start scheduling interviews with our clients. The next day we find out that the head of the investigation is a major Obama donor, the attorney at the Department of Justice and their Civil Rights Division, Barbara Bosterman. So then we put out a statement just so people knew, one, that we had been contacted finally, but two, because of this new information that was really came to light because of Chairman Issa, who's chairman of the Government Reform and Oversight Committee, that we were reevaluating whether or not we'd even want our clients to sit down and talk to the FBI because the person in charge of the investigation was such a partisan.
It's so frustrating and so disturbing. Jordan, is anyone going to be held accountable for this scandal?
You know, it's interesting. In our civil case, as that moves forward, people like Lois Lerner, who can take the fifth, and that means that her testimony, she didn't have to testify, so she couldn't be used against incriminating herself in a criminal trial. In a civil trial, so as we move forward to get to those stages, if she still refuses to testify, that can be actually taken as an inference against her. The Fifth Amendment only protects you from criminal, not civil. So there are ways that we can get to the bottom of this. But unfortunately, when you're working not only against IRS officials, but now the entire Department of Justice, because as I remind people, when you sue the IRS as an organization, as an institution, and you sue these officials in their individual and official capacity, when you sue them like that, the Department of Justice defends some of the charges. So on the one hand, the DOJ was supposed to be doing a criminal investigation that another part of the Department of Justice is defending the civil case against. And civil liability is not nearly as high, not even close to as high as criminal liability. But no way, with this many documents, so many thousands of pages from just a single group, that you could come to this conclusion so quickly.
Jordan Seculo, thanks again for the update, and thanks for staying on top of this.
Thanks, Mark.
Lawmakers have laid out a massive bipartisan spending bill. The $1.1 trillion deal boosts funding for the military, eases some spending cuts, and keeps Obamacare spending at its current levels. Congress must pass the bill by midnight on Wednesday to prevent another government shutdown. If passed, it will fund the government through September. Not enough young people are signing up for the president's health care plan, and that means the program won't work the way it's supposed to. It needs younger, healthy adults to sign up in large numbers. They'll help pay the cost of older adults who have more health problems. But so far, people between 18 and 24 only account for 24% of the total enrollment. Experts say that number should be closer to 40% to keep insurance premiums down. Patrice Lee from Generation Opportunity says young people are not signing up because Obamacare, it's a bad deal.
It's very expensive for them. On average, we're seeing premiums will increase 169% across the board. Young people realize that Obamacare is taking the young and healthy to pay for the sick and older Americans. And it's just not something that's fair. We're leveraging our future.
If more young people don't sign up before the enrollment period ends in March, many people will face higher insurance rates next year. We don't want to hear about that. Well, turning overseas, violence in Egypt today as voters made their ways to the polls. At least 11 were killed in clashes as Egyptians vote to decide the fate of a revised constitution. As Gary Lane reports, turnout was heavy despite opposition from the Muslim Brotherhood.
Members of Egypt's interim government describe the constitutional referendum as the dawn of a new day for their nation, one full of stability, justice, and free from terrorism. Egyptian Foreign Minister Nabil Fahmy talked to the press after casting his vote. "We are laying the building blocks for a new political foundation," he said, "one that will lead us to all working together and starting to build Egypt." But some are still bent on destroying Egypt in the interim. Despite tight security, this courthouse north of Cairo was nearly blown off its foundation Tuesday morning. The bombing occurred just yards away from one polling station. No one was killed in the courthouse blast, but at least 5 pro-Morsi demonstrators have reportedly died in clashes with security forces in areas of Upper Egypt. The Muslim Brotherhood, recently labeled a terrorist organization by the government, has called for a vote boycott. Regardless, lines were long at many polling stations Tuesday morning, and a poll taken by the Basira Group last month indicated a heavy voter turnout. 76% of respondents said they plan to participate in the referendum. 74% of them said they'd vote yes. The head of the Coptic Orthodox Church, Pope Tewodros II, urged Christians to vote yes.
It will allow Egypt to go forward to a better future. There's a beautiful saying among Arabs, saying yes increases the blessing.
That's because the amended Constitution guarantees freedom of worship and the building of churches.
Senior international correspondent Gary Lane joins us now with more. Gary, what does this mean for Egypt if the Constitution passes?
Well, it's expected to pass, but the question now is by how wide a margin? Will it pass by 60%, 70%? Obviously, if it passes by 70%, that's a big victory for the military, for the interim government. They'll say the people support what we did against the Muslim Brotherhood. And that's really what it will say. But it also says this is a rejection of the Muslim Brotherhood. And they're not popular in Egypt right now.
Well, what are some concerns over this revised constitution?
Mark, I think some of the concerns expressed concern the presidency and also the military. Some people say the presidency has too much power in this Constitution. Also, the military will have the power to appoint the defense secretary. That's unusual. Generally, it's a civilian government that decides that. Also, things like detention, the length of detention is unlimited. So there are some real concerns there, but of course, you don't get everything you want. And this is much better than the Constitution they had before.
We've heard a lot about persecution of Christians in Egypt. What does the Constitution mean for Egypt's Christians?
It's a good thing for Egypt's Christians because now the Constitution recognizes their right to worship, their right to build churches, also for religious law to apply in their personal lives rather than the government's law. That's a good thing. But the key here is the mechanisms and the guarantee. The Constitution can guarantee it, but the mechanisms are not in place to help the Christians if there are violations. You can build a church now, but Muslims, Islamists may tear it down. Then what do? It's the same old, same old.
Well, what's next for Egypt?
Well, what's next is one more day of voting on this referendum, and then they'll count the ballots. If it's approved, then they'll move forward on this roadmap to a stable Egypt, which will mean 3 months from now either a presidential election or a parliamentary election. One will come before the other. 3 months later, the other one will follow. Has to be decided by the interim president.
Okay. Our senior international correspondent, Gary Lane. Thanks, Gary.
Okay, Mark.
Appreciate it as always. And for more of Gary's insights, make sure you check out his blog, The Global Lane, and you can find it at our website. Our website, of course, is cbnnews.com. Syria's main opposition group may lose support from the United States and Britain if it doesn't attend peace talks in Geneva next week. An official with the Syrian National Coalition says both nations warned failure to attend will undermine their credibility and cost them the support of their Western allies. Many say opposition forces must play a role in future negotiations to secure a lasting peace. Secretary of State John Kerry today made a visit to the Vatican. He did not spend time with Pope Francis, but Kerry met with the Vatican's Secretary of State, Archbishop Pietro Parolin. They discussed a wide range of topics from violence in Syria and Africa to peace in the Mideast. Kerry stopped in Italy on his way to Kuwait, where a conference will be held for humanitarian donors to Syria war victims. Pope Francis is speaking out against abortion, calling the procedure horrific. During his State of the World address, the Pope said abortion is, quote, evidence of a throwaway culture that wastes people as well as food, discarding humans as unnecessary. It was the Pope's strongest statement on the issue to date. Some conservative Catholics had accused him of not speaking out strongly enough against abortion since becoming Pope. Francis also denounced the persecution of Christians around the world. Coming up, how a group from Israel is helping to meet the needs of those affected by last year's devastating typhoon in the Philippines. Just 2 months after an historic typhoon devastated the Filipino city, Tacloban is starting to show signs of economic recovery. Tacloban City Hall says businesses are starting to reopen and shoppers are returning to marketplaces, according to the Washington Post. 6 grocery stores are once again operating in the city. 26 hardware stores have opened their doors to those working to rebuild, and 15 banks have now reopened. That's great. Boy, things we all take for granted around here. Economic recovery isn't the only thing facing victims of Typhoon Haiyan. The emotional damage caused by the storm is taking a toll on many, and that's why one group of Israeli counselors has traveled to the region. They're partnering with CBN to help people cope with emotional trauma. Lucille Toulousan reports.
More than 2 months since Typhoon Haiyan struck the Philippines, survivors like Lorraine Delieva still feel haunted by their near-death experience.
The water was rising. My sister and I immediately ran out of the house and swam in the street to higher ground. My sister, who did not know how to swim, held onto a water jug. We were really frightened because the current was so strong.
Lorraine and her sister lived in the hard-hit city of Tacloban. Their closest family lived 49 miles away, and all means of communication had been cut off.
I worried so much for my daughters because we cannot contact them. I wasn't able to eat for 3 days and 3 nights thinking about them.
My sister and I knew that our family was worrying about us, and so we decided to go home even if we had to walk for 3 days.
Although her children are home, Monica still feels the trauma brought about by Haiyan.
I still shake and I am afraid every time it rains hard and I hear the strong wind.
More than 16 million Filipinos have been affected by the storm. More than 6,000 died. 2,000 are still missing. 600,000 are homeless, and tens of thousands of survivors work to rebuild their lives. Aside from attending to the physical and spiritual needs of the victims of Typhoon Haiyan,
CBN Disaster Relief has brought in an Israeli team of experts in trauma counseling, and this is to help the people cope with their tragic experiences so that they can move on with their lives.
We chose to partner with CBN because you're really willing to give any help that is needed everywhere.
Dr. Faris' group helped train various government units, the Red Cross, and several schools.
The teaching is very simple. Activate the person, activate yourself, try to stay out of being helplessness.
I feel very relaxed now. I will teach this to my family and apply it to my 2 daughters who are most traumatized in trying to save themselves. Thank you so much to the Israeli Relief Coalition and to CBN. You enlightened our minds and you've taught us not to lose hope.
Dr. Farhi is optimistic that the strong faith of the Filipino people and the resilience displayed by survivors will help them put the trauma of Typhoon Haiyan behind them. Lucille Telusan, CBN News, Giwan, Samar.
Up next, cooking for kings and Clintons. Meet a former White House chef when we come back. Welcome back. At the White House, chefs spend months preparing for the many parties and receptions hosted by the President and First Lady. They're used to feeding large crowds, but they also have another important job: feeding the first family. In tonight's Focus Report, Jennifer Wishon introduces us to a former White House chef who worked under 3 administrations.
The White House is home to the most well-known families in the world. We know a lot about their public lives, but at the end of the day, when they head to the private residence on the 2nd floor, what do they eat? Chef John Moeller worked in the White House kitchen for more than a decade, serving Presidents George H.W. Bush, Clinton, and George W. Bush. Now he's dishing on what they ate in his new book, Dining at the White House, From the President's Table to Yours. How does a kid from Dutch country, Pennsylvania, wind up being a chef in the White House?
Obviously, the short answer is right place, right time. It was extraordinary. You know, you see this person on the TV, but then you see this person on the 2nd floor of the White House just enjoying a meal. If it be chicken pot pie or maybe filet mignon. It was extraordinary.
Moeller cooked for state dinners, plated thousands of hors d'oeuvres for Christmas parties, and perhaps most importantly, prepared daily meals for the first family. What in the world does the president eat for breakfast? What does he eat for lunch and dinner?
So every Thursday, I would submit menus for the coming week, and that would be for lunch and dinner. And by Friday afternoon, it was up on this little table in the West Sitting Hall where they could see it and show what the menu is for the week.
But sometimes first children like Chelsea Clinton didn't want gourmet.
I think Mom and Dad was out one night and she asked for some mac and cheese. So, you know, I boiled up some noodles, made a bechamel sauce, grated some cheese, mixed it all together. And she said that was all well and good, but next time could have the one from the box, you know. So, I mean, I wasn't really hurt. We're there to serve. So, I mean, if that's something she liked, and we'd have to keep a couple boxes on the shelf there, because every once in a while, if she's by herself, she wanted like a quick snack or a meal there. If Mom and Dad was out, we'd break out the Kraft mac and cheese there, you know.
And I understand that you have a chicken pot pie recipe that transcends party lines.
Late in the Clinton administration there, he was having dinner one night on a cold winter's evening and decided to do a chicken pot pie from my hometown, Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And it's a nice hearty chicken pot pie with, instead of the dough being on top and around, we make it and put it inside like a heavy dumpling. I put it in the bowl, I sent it up to him, and I was in the butler's pantry there, and the door opened up, and I see the president leaning over the bowl, and he looked up at me, gave me the big thumbs up, and said, "John, this is the kind of food I like." And Mrs. Clinton was standing there, and she looked at it and said, "Well, let's make a few extra biscuits for that next time," you know? I said, "Absolutely." And then when George W. Bush came into office, it was a cold winter's night, and he was by himself, and I said, "Let me try that chicken pot pie recipe again." Would you know it, the same thing happened. I was upstairs, the door opened up, he's leaning over the bowl eating it, he looked up at me, gave me the thumbs up, and said, "John, this is the kind of food I like."
Should people be intimidated? Can the average cook actually read these recipes and come out with a product that's pretty close to what you came out with?
I think so. What our final testing is we sent them out to a group of home cooks all across this country, actually, and they recreated them, and they got back to us with comments. And we adjusted some prep times and things of that nature, but for the most part, they enjoyed it, and they said we were able to execute this.
For Moeller, it was the job of a lifetime, and now you can dine like the presidents he served. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, Washington.
Up next, praying for rain, why one group in California is asking God to open the heavens. Catholic bishops in California are asking people to pray for rain. Water levels there are far less than they usually are this time of the year. Locals are concerned over the threat of wildfires, and farmers are worried about their crops. That's why one group of Catholics is turning to God, saying don't underestimate the power of prayer.
We have a history of farmers in our family. My grandparents worked the fields, and so I know the importance of needing the rain in our valley.
We put it in our prayers, along with everything else that we do, our families, our health, and whatever's central in our lives at the time.
The governor of California is weighing whether to make an official drought declaration. Meanwhile, the people of St. John's Cathedral will continue to pray. Good for them. God is in control. Well, that's all for this edition of NewsWatch. Remember, you can email us your comments and questions at newswatch@cbn.com. Hope you'll join us next time.